DevOps for me is in the widest form, it became the collaboration across. And then that kind of evolved into a platform team, kind of helping other teams. But in essence, you could see them as a feature team that is just delivering other parts that other teams are using. I know, the typical cries of DevOps is dead, platform engineering is the next thing. It happened at SRE and so on. So again, the point being is that.
Hi, welcome back to another episode of Real-World Serverless, a podcast where I speak with real-world practitioners and get their story from the trenches. Today, I'm really honored to be joined by Patrick deBois, who you may know as the godfather of DevOps, and he coined the term DevOps at the DevOps Days event in Belgium back in 2009. Hey, Patrick, really good to see you and welcome.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Jan. Yeah, really appreciate it. Right, so been a fan from your work as well. So it's kind of always nice to level each other up. So.
Yeah, I've been following your work for so long. It's amazing to finally get you on the podcast and talk about DevOps and AI, because I saw you've been shifting a lot of your focus on AI, which I would like to ask you a few questions. But I guess I want to maybe start with the basics and get you to introduce yourself, talk about your recent experiences, because you've been at a few different companies. I think most recently you were at the Sneak, and then you moved to Showpad recently. So for anyone who hasn't been following your work closely, do you want to just introduce yourself as the godfather of DevOps?
Well, I never do that. I let others do that for me as well. But I appreciate the honor. I think I have gray hair, so I have a long career. But what's important to know is that I took the habit of changing every 3-4 years role and domain. So in the beginning it was maybe more system administration, but then I switched in maybe testing, became more of an IT manager, and it just keeps on. And so usually you could say sometimes it is following what is new. Where that's SecOps, that was at Sneak. But I've been at Atlassian when people were scaling from on-prem to cloud, when they moved to their SaaS, or I've done also like a startup, so government. So you name it, I've probably done it in a direction that makes sense. And now recently, it was actually during COVID that I got excited about. So my goal was to make let's say a clone of myself, because it's sometimes not that much fun to do webinars and Zoom calls and so on. So I got into more video. AI came a part of that slowly. We call it, at that time it was maybe the metaverse direction, but then there was more and more AI, because there was the model that you could do, and then there was the AI that kind of helped there. Then DALL-E came, and then now the whole LLM Gen AI craze. So that's kind of how I rolled into this. But if you go way back, when search engines were parsing whatever we had on the internet, so it's like relevant again, because we're all crawlers and feeding the models. At that time, I was also working in NLP and parsing things and language and kind of those things. And then somewhere in my career, I also had like the links between OWL being a meta language to describe resources and knowledge management. So again, I've been around. I'm very passionate about these things, and I like to have the different perspectives in the different roles. And I would say that's probably what led me to DevOps, and where most people know me from. It's kind of having empathy, having done most of the roles in a company, and understanding when you're in one group, the other group thinks differently from you, what you can do. So that's kind of my personality, being a bridger across worlds there.
Yeah, I think you're taking full advantage of what the industry has to offer, and that's one of the great things about our industry. Is just that there's so many different roles, so many different problems, so many different domains that you can tap into, and that's one of the things I really enjoy being a consultant as well. Just you can solve problems in so many different client domains, and you can see so many different combination of contexts and the environments and requirements, and that there's no one sort of solution that's going to fit everybody. And so I think that's one of the most exciting things I found about working in software. And going back to, I guess, DevOps, I mean, when you coined the term DevOps, how would you define, what DevOps is? Because I feel it's one of those things that's been misinterpreted or misunderstood by so many different people. And I think I've heard everything from DevOps is basically developer doing ops to companies who are supposedly going adopting DevOps, but then that they just rebrand the existing infrastructure team, DevOps teams, and that's all they've done. And I think oftentimes the conversation around DevOps just devolves into arguments about which tool is the best. So I guess I want to hear it from the horse's mouth. How do you define DevOps?
Sure. And that, let's say, my personal definition or the way how I think about this obviously has changed over the 14 years we're now like have the term, or even before. So in beginning, it was a lot more about, sorry, I'm saying this from my own perspective. Other people have different perspectives. So for me, it became as an extension of Agile. And at that time, we were changing things, moving through the cloud. So anything that would make or throw it over the wall mentality and fix that, whether that was a WAR file, a jar file, kind of people were sending us, and then he's like, now what in production? Like, we don't know. So kind of that pressure point as Agile got more productive, and then we needed to go earlier in the value stream and talk to the devs and understand what the business goals were to do a better job at kind of like delivering the software. So that was kind of the early getting together. Over now a period of time, the 14 years, it has evolved. Let's say SaaS suppliers became a thing and the cloud became a thing. So you could think of this collaboration being extended to third parties or suppliers. So that's one in the mix. And then for a while, I had my own kind of, helping with a startup. And then I started seeing other problems of collaboration. And that was like, hey, we're not hiring the right people. Hang on, we have not a good collaboration with HR hiring the right people. So we work on that. So in a nutshell, I would say, and then obviously security got into the mix as well. So my definition that I kind of like put out like about a year ago or something to revise was DevOps is everything you do to overcome the friction of silos, and all the rest is engineering. And yes, you can do engineering without helping anybody. It happens. And obviously, if you just say, I'll deliver infrastructure, I don't care about my users, I don't care about what they do, they just need to, use me, and have no collaboration. So that is not DevOps. So the DevOps for me is in the widest form, it became the collaboration across. These days, you would see this shifting from just the one group developer working with the ops. We kind of evolved into you build it, you're running. So we became like 20 groups. And then what we needed to collaborate on was differently. Like Abe was providing services and documentation. So we almost came like a supplier to each other in a company. And then there was pieces that obviously infrastructure was still a part of this that needed maybe a more global approach. And then that kind of evolved into a platform team, kind of helping other teams. But in essence, you could see them as a feature team that is just delivering other parts that other teams are using. So kind of that, in a nutshell, is where the thought is overcoming friction. And I still see it apply, whether we now could name it like platform engineering or SRE or DevOps, or it is the mentality of collaborating across, and not just in your own group, but across to your consumers, your customers, your kind of the people that like depend on your service.
Right. Yeah, I guess that makes sense, because initially back in 2009, a lot of friction of collaboration is between the ops team and the development team. So DevOps became, I guess, the way to bridge the gap between the two of them. And then later on, I think you mentioned as well, we have the DevSecOps, where, okay, now that we've solved the collaboration problem between devs and the ops, but then security is another thing that we have to think about. And that's, again, another silo. How do we bring that into it? And I think more recently, you also have a FinOps, which has become a quite popular thing with serverless, where Okay, with serverless and the pay as you use, we have another dimension we got to think about, another group we got to sort of involve, which is the finance people, the accounting people. How do we take them into consideration as well when we're designing our systems, especially when in the cloud everything you're doing is you're buying a service, you pick a service to use, you start paying for those things. That becomes finance becomes another part of that the conversation. And I'm really glad you mentioned the platform team as well, because platform engineering has been all the rage recently. And I've also heard a few people, I think maybe charity majors also said this as well, that the platform engineering is like the next step, or the next step of the evolution of DevOps. How do you feel, I guess a lot of people have got different opinions about what platform engineering means. What's your take on platform engineering, and what is the role of, say, a platform team within an organization?
Sure. So I know the typical cries of DevOps is that platform engineering is the next thing. It happened at SRE and so on. So again, the point being is that the organizational structure of companies have changed. So we need a different form of collaboration, and usually that results in new kind of ways of working. And those new ways of working now have been kind of bucketed around platform engineering in a way. When we think about the typical clouds and those services being provided to application teams. So the aspect of collaboration is the same. It's just that you apply different practices because the org has evolved. So for me, there's still the correlation that this is DevOps, but it's kind of how you apply it to that collaboration. The difference is instead of it having that one team you serve, there's multiple teams. But in essence, I think of it as, like I mentioned before, it's a feature team. If you are an identity service that all the application teams are using, you're also a feature team. And so if you happen to be the team that provides infrastructure, then obviously, you're also a feature. You just provide the infrastructure, and more they can just directly go to the cloud. And that's a certain part that a platform team does. So they make things easier. But one of the unique things they are positioned is that they see all the teams usually on the application teams. So which puts them in a good place to think about consolidation practices that they want to align. So for me, there's a link between platform teams and developer experience, because when you see that, you can kind of get the scale of every team being amplified, so providing that as a service. And I think the mentality shift is, well, obviously people have been doing this even before DevOps, is treating everybody that relies on you as a customer in a way. And so you're talking to them like, what do you need? Is this useful for you? So we're not building in isolation in a vacuum. We're doing it to enable other teams to do their job. And so quite often that platform team is then an enabler for either some services cloud, the build system, the storage, things like that. But it could also be the security part that you bring in, because there's governance that team is facilitating. But it could even go on the application layer itself, because API standards, API governance, the mesh, somebody needs to put that there as well. And if you don't have an API team, then that team is taking care of that as well. And you can even extend that to data as well, like data standards, data streaming. So they're always looking at kind of where we do an economies of scale by going out to multiple teams and kind of providing them and investing in one thing, and then having a multiplier to multiple teams, having a value from that. This will not solve all the problems, but this is kind of the paradigm I think we're shifting towards.
Okay. So have you seen any sort of examples of platform engineering done right or done wrong? One of the models I've seen is kind of similar to SRE model, at least the way that Google used to do it, where instead of having a team that's just kind of building in isolation, essentially the platform team becomes like a team of engineers that gets embedded into feature teams and development teams and kind of working with the team directly on a day-to-day basis. And then I guess as part of that, they learn about the challenges, the problems those teams have, and then they bring into their own sort of like a platform engineering team discipline, and then they start to look across multiple teams and then come out with like a roadmap for problems that need to be solved. But I've also seen other companies kind of just doing the more sort of traditional throwing the over the wall kind of model where, okay, platform team is kind of serving the customer as internal customers, as which are the feature teams, but they're kind of building things in isolation, and there's a bit of a top-down approach to that, which I feel is the wrong way to do platform engineering. Have you seen some examples of good and bad, and what it should look like?
Yeah. So it's a common discussion about. It's almost like if you're a platform team and you think about it, you build it, they'll use it, and we all know that like it doesn't work that well unless you picked right. If you picked right, you can do this. So it depends how much empathy you have with the problem, how spot on you're serving your customers on what they need. The building in the isolation is an interesting one because if you serve 15 teams, you have to make a choice. It's not going to be everybody's going to be happy. I usually give the example of if you're a SaaS provider, if you're small, you're going to say to every customer, yes, we can do this. Yes, we can do this. If you grow, you say like, well, only the ones who pay actually get to say what we do because all the rest is kind of like noise and marketing. So it is picking those battles of, and sometimes that's said like, okay, we're aiming for 80% or something like that we help the others, and the rest is the exceptions, and then we're guiding them, but they need maybe more hand holding in the exception or kind of help to bring them more into the fold of the streamlined solution. So it is there. I always give the example of let's say you're AWS and you work with a team in a company. Do you talk to them on a daily basis? No. Like it doesn't scale. Like yes, what you do is you improve things like documentation, customer feedback mechanisms that you bring into your products. So it is not necessarily that you have the hand holding, but at a certain point you have to have a scale of feedback. So if you can achieve the feedback without having to sit with everybody together, well, then that's also a good way to do this. And then you can obviously discuss whether that is aligned with all the other teams' goal, yes or no. But that's why that feedback mechanism is, again, another form of collaboration. That's going at conferences and speaking about this. In your company, this might be, oh, I'm going to do like a lunch session or something like that. So it is different forms. And it's not always like I have to sit next to them and the close collaboration. So that depends a little bit on how your company, how your team's maturity is. And it could be a transient phase. And for some topics, it totally makes sense to do the more handholding. And for others, we can already predict, right? Okay, observability. It's not that there's like 15,000 flavors of observability. This is the platform. This is how you do logging. This is how you do metrics. And this is a standard, right? So it depends on the variation level of what you're providing as well.
Yeah, and I guess also it depends on whether or not your organization is physically co-located in one place. Where if you've got the teams, your platform team is in one country, but then you have a support development teams in lots of different countries. Sometimes just physically not possible to be present and next to somebody when their team is physically located in a different country altogether. Okay, that's a good point. And I guess now that we kind of talked a little bit about the platform engineering and the DevOps, I also want to mention that you've been shifting your focus to AI recently, and as many people have been, I'm sure. And I watched one of your talk that you did about, I guess, the role of AI tools in the software development. I think you did that. You gave that talk in Amsterdam in the May this
Oh,
year.
okay. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was a very good talk. I saw a lot, well, quite a few tools I've used and seen already, but also saw a few new ones as well. I guess my question is, how do you think AI is going to change DevOps practices, in particularly things like CI/CD and maybe other aspects of what we're doing, as part of DevOps and as part of what we do day to day?
Yeah. So maybe first of all, I make when I do the narrative DevOps and AI, I make two different angles. One is about we use Gen AI and AI to kind of do a better job at DevOps or at the automation part of DevOps, should say. And then the second one is how do we put more DevOps in the delivery of Gen AI? So I'm kind of like having both, because that is also kind of a world on its own, trying to get it more under control, testable, observable, and so on. So I'll come back to your first part, like how is it going to help the engineers? Um, Again, the canonical example every put out there is like a copilot during the development, obviously, but that idea of a copilot can be anywhere in like whatever job we do. It's like a system that's there. It's answering your questions. It's kind of helping you to do a better job and things you might not know. So that's the typical thing of, hey, I'm going to ask you the question. It is better knowledge management in a form that you can bring there. Then there's tedious tasks that we usually are like, we can save time with. Oh, I'm going to do a summary of a pull request, right? Or I'm going to do a summary of like, where's now actually the bug in this thing? Like, please tell me. So there's like time savers in that perspective, that AI is just faster at grokking a large amount of information there as well. And then I would say there's a third, like there's many parts, but a third one could be uh, advisory and governance, where we set it a bunch of rules, and we let's say you're in a company and you know that all those kind of wikis written up by the developer guidelines should be like this, and this is what you do if for the internal process and all those parts. I think with my hat, for example, from VP engineering, you're constantly chasing and educating people on the new guidelines, and it's a lot of work, and it's also a lot to kind of check all the time. So that is one other place where I think, hey, I'm a developer. I coded it this way, and it's giving me feedback based on what the company standards are, what the good practices are, and giving a learning experience there as well. It's not just about like, give me this and I'll use it. It's kind of that learning and educating part, whether that's in governance, whether that's you becoming a better developer there as well. And then maybe like a last example I would give is that's probably a little bit further in the future. I, as a developer, am doing something, but I need to help from somebody else. And then all of a sudden it would like think about an agent that would start off a workflow that takes care of a part that otherwise you have to chase yourself. And that comes back after a while with an answer. And that's kind of probably where the next iteration would go on these things. I give it a task and it performs the task. It's not just a simple question and an answer, it goes. And that could be, spinning me up the whole cluster one way, or code me something along the standards, or verify with legal that something has been done or approved, yes, no. So that's kind of the collaboration and task oriented thing where it can come in. And then you see that it could obviously be during the development, during the pipeline, during your ops work. It doesn't really matter. So one of those areas could be, you being educated on your postmortem, or helping you to do an outage and to have situational awareness of all the logs coming in, which otherwise you have to query and find all the pieces yourself. So I think it can apply everywhere in the CI/CD pipeline or the typical DevOps workflow, and it can even go above. Let's say product features are better described. Uh, Mocks are better visualized. The conversion from a UI is better automated directly into a component. So again, a lot of different areas that we can get better at this as well.
Yeah, and recently had the Charity Majors on the show as well, and she also talked about how they've been building this AI assistant into Honeycomb, and how you can, instead of writing a query yourself, you can just say, "Tell me what's wrong," and then the AI system will go and look at the metrics, and then trying to find the outliers, and sort of bubble up outliers and the things that maybe is a root cause, so that you as a human operator don't have to know the how. You just need to know, what I guess what to look out for, and what to ask of the AI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but like any abstraction, so if you can call it an abstraction in a way, obviously it shields you from the details, but there's this opposite effect where you say, well, when we shield somebody too long from the details, when things fail, we don't know anymore what to do. So there's this kind of benefit, but we're not writing assembler anymore, right? So where we don't need to know that level, but maybe at certain levels we still have to understand. And I usually give the example of, if your CI/CD system would not work, would you still be able to do all these steps manual? Like, would you still understand what's going on in that pipeline? And so it's kind of understanding like what is still requires training. And a lot of the chaos engineering as another field is actually training people again when it fails to understand. So you kind of have to uh, already assume failure and be prepared for the failure, but still, if it goes faster, automate it, then by all means do the faster automation.
Yeah, as a rule of thumb, I always try to at least understand two abstraction layers beneath the one that I want to work at, because it's more productive to work at a higher level abstraction. But then, like you said, if you ever only ever known that higher level of abstraction, then you're going to be really stuck if there's something goes wrong or it doesn't work. And I think I see a lot of that, especially in the front end world, where everyone only ever use React or some other framework. They don't understand how HTML works, how CSS works. And so when suddenly you take away their tools, they have no idea what to do. And I've seen developers so stuck in that position where their entire worldview of how the system works is the framework, as opposed to understanding the nuts and bolts underneath it. Even if you don't use it every day, it's good to at least understand and know it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the feedback that I saw a talk at an event, and it was a team that went all in on AI during their development and pipeline and testing, right? So they used as much as they could. And they said productivity went up, and delivery speed went up, and debugging time went up, and security vulnerabilities went up. So it's kind of like there's no escaping certain things in a way. So yeah, anyway, it still feels useful that when, like I said, if we save time, and it does, then obviously it makes us go faster there as well.
Yeah, I guess it's not just about the tools; it's also about the people using the tools. The right tool in the wrong hands can also be dangerous, and that's kind of worries me sometimes when I see social media posts from people who who doesn't know software engineering, and then they say, "Oh yeah, I'm able to build these microservices just using AI. Just ask a few prompts, and then you spit out a service." I'm like, well, yeah, but you probably don't want to be running that in production, because you're gonna have no idea when things go wrong what to do. Um,
Yeah. Well, we can go all the way up to go to as a function that you can use very wisely, or you can totally kind of misuse it. So again, it's the nature of the beast, and that's kind of still, is that still the human part we're doing? I don't know, but what I personally find is that when I'm tackling something new, that like in a new language. Obviously, the models have not been trained on that, and it's kind of doesn't make me go that faster. I've heard people say it sometimes breaks like the developer flow because like I exactly know what it needs to do. Please don't go like start giving me suggestions because it's really annoying and I'm clicking them away. I also found while coding, let's say Selenium testing or something, that has changed like the interface over a decade many times. You get like wrong questions or wrong answers or the obvious answer everybody would give, and it's wrong because you've hit that bug forever, and then you have a hard time like helping the AI to kind of like come up with the right answer. So, but like any tool, like you say, there's use it wisely in your toolbox, and it's definitely something to consider in your workflow.
Yeah, I think currently for a lot of the sort of coding task for the small sort of specific problems like writing a function is very good at that. It's great. But I think a lot of the more sort of specific tasks like how we design this system, I find it useful to sort of give you like a rough idea, like an outline of a solution, but not so good when it comes to give you the
Yeah,
specifics, how to wire everything together. There's always some small bugs, problems that you end up spending more time debugging it than to just do it yourself.
yeah.
It's been quite hit and miss for me when it comes to using it for a lot of the work that I do in terms of building serverless applications and things like that.
But I think it's actually changing in a way. Like, sorry to mention that, but so the next layer in that would be that instead of writing the function and having the AIs, give me the code, is that we start describing the function in text and we don't convert it anymore to code. We just ask it to perform a task. And let's say you want to have classification. In the past, you had to write like a lot of code to do classification, train the whole model. But now in your function, you would write this in text and it would get executed and give a return. Like we're not coding anymore, we're writing the text. And that brings up a whole new kind of box of things. Like somebody said, like English is the new kind of coding language, right? But like yesterday, even OpenAI announced that their functions are basically describing this in human text. It's not something you code. So there is a new paradigm that is happening. And it's not anymore from us copying, verifying, and then kind of like pasting it in the code. It is the code. So that's an interesting evolution in there. I'm not, we're not there yet, but this is kind of an interesting part how this is evolving.
Yeah, there's certainly quite a few big announcements yesterday. And for those of you who are, I guess, listening on the podcast, I guess this is probably going to come out in the probably end of November or early December. But on the day of or on the time of recording, it was just the day after OpenAI's Developer Day, where they announced a whole bunch of different things, including GPTs, their version of the first version of agents, kind of thing. As well as assistants, AI, and budget other things as well. And certainly, I think the whole thing has shown they did a demo of how to build a new GPT, so your own sort of GPT, and it's all just by text, by description of what you want to do. And the same thing, I think, was with the way you design and build plugins, which was also entirely just describing what your plugin is going to do. And so I think that's really interesting in terms of what we're going to see in the future, in terms of what it means to be a software engineer. You just need to know, English. And but what I find also interesting and potentially challenging is I've never really ever worked with anyone who is great at very precisely explaining what the requirement is. And
Mm-hmm.
part of the job of a software engineer is to just figuring out what it is the stakeholder really wants. So requirements are always a bit fussy, it's never quite specific, and always leaves a lot of room for interpretation. And that works well enough, well, maybe not well enough, but it works to some degree with humans. But when it comes to AI, you really need to have more specific, really specific requirements, and I think that's probably something that we may struggle once we get to that point where English is the programming language, and people is going to have a hard time explaining what it is that they want in all the different details and thinking about all the different edge cases. Do you
Yeah.
think that's going to be a problem going forward?
Um, it is not exact science, so you always have to have let's say, a certain risk validation. But what I've seen is that let's say you write a function and you want it to in text, right? Typically, what you do now is you have another call that actually asks, like, is this the correct answer? Right? So that's the second one. And then you would say, well, given these three examples, can I validate the solution? So you see, it's just another, like, it's not that complexity is reduced, it's just shift somewhere else. But as these calls will go faster, it might end up being as fast as we were used to what we do right now. And then if you complement it sometimes with exact validation, let's say I'm checking a schema, and then for that, maybe I delegate that to a linter, which is very good at that job. Or I delegate it at a smaller model, which can check a certain thing very well. So you see, it's just a different way of arranging the pieces on the board to get the same function. But it is, will this get closer to what product managers are describing? Uh, Maybe, but it might save a lot of time on proof of concepts and proving ideas from the business at that acceleration, to mention it. So I'm seeing some signs of this, that it's being used, but latency has been killing us by having so many verification calls. Uh, yeah, the correctness of the models are being improved, so maybe it becomes acceptable. And it feels somehow to the discussion similar to, we need to have 100% uptime. Well, we know it's not true. So maybe we can architect around this by saying, well, we assume failure. How do we tackle the failure? Do we ask the end user to verify? Do we have another LLM verifying this? Like, there's several options people are exploring about this right now. But you could say 4GL back in the day was already that promise. Like, I can express it and it will just figure out how the database queries will have to work. But we haven't figured it out right now.
Right. Yeah. Because instead of writing tests, would be providing examples to the LLM.
Yeah.
And I guess so the thing you mentioned earlier, well, just now about using a different LLM to verify it, that kind of reminds me of the approach that they've been using to do a lot of the images where they was it a lot of the sort of the fake images they generate. They're using this what do you call it? These basically two AIs. One generates the image, the other
Yeah,
one,
adversary
yeah, that's it, our
networks.
adversary network, where they kind of just have two AIs just gradually improving each other and making
Mhm.
getting smarter, and ultimately you're getting much better at doing that one particular job that you've been tasked with. Um, so I guess, I guess the thing is from what we're just talking about here, it sounds like the future of software engineering is going to look very different to what we are, what we've been used to the last I don't know 10 decades. So is there anything that the software engineers that like ourselves can do now to prepare ourselves for the changes that's going to happen now? Once all the AI are getting better at doing these things, and are there any skill sets that we need to just, get better at? If it's just going to be a case of knowing how to express our requirement
Yeah.
better, then that's easy. But what about things like, do we actually need to learn how to build an AI system ourselves? Do you think that's going to be a requirement going forward?
Yeah. So I I'm not a data scientist, and it's one of the reasons why I was very eyeballing that field, but never thought like, oh, I'm never gonna get in there. Like, I don't have the math majors, and it's like, it's not just not gonna happen. I'm not at that level in any way. what I feel right now in this space is it's all about integration and testing, like in validation. And that happens to be the field that we're pretty good at. So why am I so interested in this? Because first, obviously, it's learning and a new paradigm, which is something that always excites me. But I personally have to play with something new to kind of get a better understanding. And then it becomes this like, for this use case, I think it's a good fit. For that, no, I'm going to go with another approach. So that is the trying of this. So everybody in DevSec and Ops that is kind of like, oh, this is not for me, forget it. Like, do a pet project on your own, try to play with this for a subject that's very dear to your heart, whether that's your wine cellar that you're trying to optimize, or it doesn't really matter, but play with it, because the next level might get abstracted again and you might not understand what's underneath. And then you're a little bit clueless. And I see already that trend happening. OpenAI, again, is abstracting so much away that, okay, how does it work when I need to do this? And it's sometimes really hard to find that information. So I would advise people. It's funny, people tell me at events, we were very late to this DevOps thing. We don't want to be late for this train. And that's also how I feel about this. It is not just development, it is sales, marketing, it's every job is being affected. And I feel it's part of our job as engineers to understand the next part of our toolkit, to kind of learn about this. And that brings up new things like, oh, have you heard about embeddings? What is a vector database? Kind of how does an agent actually work? Because I want to feed it data, but how does it actually work? So kind of work from there. I think we need to do, and it is a lot different than dismissing like IoT is not my thing, so not going to go there. AI is just going to be in your job, and that's not going to be an exception in that way.
Yeah, and the scary thing for me is that unlike any of the other things we talked about, AI is just moving so fast. It's just crazy how quickly things move, and I'm still just looking at LangChain and trying to understand how that works, and then suddenly, four other things came up, and you're trying
Yeah,
to read and trying to understand what these other things, what they are, how they work, and yeah, it feels like the pace of innovation is just too fast right now. It becomes really hard to just keep up, even for someone who doesn't have a full-time job like myself. Just trying to keep up with everything that's coming up. It's just been it's been quite
I
exhausting.
definitely hear you, Jan. Like I have the same struggle. This is not like center my job, but I'm really trying to keep up and learn as much as we can. But we can also bring our experience to that table, but we just have to understand that world better. And for example, I've tried to bring more observability in that world, like what would that mean, or testing, or kind of those parts that we've been advocating for the last kind of decade. And that's if I would say that that is another silo to bridge, because data and other parts of the engineering used to live aside, and the data lake was not part of the immediate production. And that's kind of a new fusion and friction point, where I think it's an interesting part, to bring that like a collaboration again there.
Oh yeah, that brings me back to the thing you mentioned earlier about the two angles we're looking at DevOps and AI. One of them being the how do you bring observability and DevOps to AI development? So what have you sort of seen in that particular angle from that in that space?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people ask me like, how do you like? Do we have to train a model? Yes, no. So they're very worried. I think we're at the point that we don't need specifically to train a model, but where the DevOps angle is burning the hardest right now is like, how do we test these things? We know they're not correct, and our traditional test methods are failing with this. And in a way, the same thing is with our observability. It is not correct, but luckily, we're very good in ops at dealing with uncertainty. We just need to kind of rethink our tooling. I'll give the example of when you're doing a monitoring function, you say like, is the server up, yes or no, or you check a certain metric. But what would that mean for an LLM app? Imagine I have an application that does summaries of text, and I use an LLM to do that. I can check um, exactly how many words there are, which is a kind of like a precise check. I can count the words and say it shouldn't be above a certain number. But can I say that the text is actually relevant to my summary? How I'm going to write that code? I like that's a lot harder. So, for example, you can use an other small AI model to say is A and B relevant in there. Um, I can check grammar, so I can use more something like a linter. So that's kind of like when you bring out a new application. I usually say there's the prompt that you use, there's the model that you use to bring it in, there's your own kind of middleware or orchestration code that you bring in, there's your APIs that you bring in. But all those pieces together, you need to almost have an end-to-end test. If you change the prompt, everything will break. If you change the model, everything will break. If you change your code, everything will break. So you're very much integration testing all those pieces. And then the testing is a different way by exact testing, using another model, or even the third one is using another LLM to answer or verify the other answers as well. And we're doing then the same thing in production. We have a test data set of a certain version that we deployed, the 5 components, and then we run those health checks in production to see if none of it has changed and still giving the same results. So a company like Y Labs, they have like this health check that runs a data input and output in your applications that you can actually have those verifications there as well. So that's I think the fascinating point of testing and observability that is different of these apps than we usually knew.
Right. Yes, that's something that I spoke with Matt Carey recently, and he's also been doing a lot of work with Gen AI and building tools with LangChain. And funny enough, he's actually he built one of the tools to use ChatGPT to do code reviews on your pull requests and things like that.
Yeah,
And one of the things he brought up was also about how to test your AI applications, and he did exactly what you said. He basically using AI to verify its own output and doing some kind of fuzzy matching as well, so that it knows, okay, even though it may not get 100% the exact text, but the basic structure should still be there. So look for those properties about the answer as opposed to the exact string that gets outputted. So that's so I guess maybe you can also do things like if it's a case of summarizing, maybe you can also do the reverse as well, so that if you take a summary and then expand it again, it
yeah,
should be almost like the previous text that it was summarized from. But yeah, it's interesting. This space, I think there's going to be some really interesting frameworks and tools that's going to come out of that to make these kind of things easier. Because
yeah.
I think there's still a lot of people are just confused about how do we test
Correct.
AI
Yeah,
applications.
yeah. And there's other components like caching is differently because the text is not always the same, but if you have similarity, then we give the same result. So it's not the exact caching as we used to know. So that's a change. And then if you have to build in all applications these verifications, whether that is correct or the summary is fine or it isn't leaking PII or like it's not recommending like your competitor to your customers or stuff like that, right? There's now like let's say a WAF for LLM. You instead of doing kind of the regex, you kind of say like it's not supposed to do these things, and I'm gonna put a shield on the output in that way. So that like companies like Cisco are kind of trying to create this what go over the wire, kind of like content filters, but a little bit smarter and tuned to Gen AI content. So again, there's a whole field of those pieces spinning up in the industry as well.
It's very interesting. So yeah, Patrick, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. That's all the questions I had. Do you have any other things that you want to share? Any other project that you're working on, and how do people find you on the internet?
Sure. Maybe one thing I can mention is I have a small course on GitHub around learning from a DevSec and Ops perspective LLMs. So I have a bunch of examples in LangChain. So it's something people like to understand because I always want to understand what was going under the hood, and so that repo is going down. So I'll send you the link, and you'll probably add it to the show notes or something, so we can do that.
Yep.
And then people can find me usually on, let's say, the fire hose is on Twitter, Patrick deBois. LinkedIn is the aggregated version that you can connect to me or follow me on LinkedIn. And then I have a YouTube channel where I try to also publish all my talks and pieces there as well. And the YouTube handle is Jedi Forever because like I'm a Star Wars fan, and people can find me there or subscribe me there.
Yeah, I noticed that in your email as well. You had the Jedi,
Yeah,
but yeah, you find all the links in the description below, and you can then go and find Patrick's YouTube channel. That's where actually I watched your talk, Patrick, about AI, and that what got me to get you on the show and to talk about it.
yeah, you're welcome. It was a pleasure. So
It's been a pleasure. Okay, take it easy, guys, and see you guys next time. And Patrick, I hope to see you in person again sometime soon.
yes, let's do that.
Okay, bye bye.